Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Farron and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. Tavor sat rigid in the captain's seat of his small four-person ship. From the seat behind him, a human placed a gentle hand on his trembling shoulder. The gentleness of the act betrayed nothing of the fact that the human was holding an S&W 500 Magnum in their other hand, pressing it against the back of his seat after having told him to just keep flying. For the void's sake, Tavor had no idea why the deadliest organism ever discovered was sitting behind him. His species, the Quar, didn't sweat. Their bodies had evolved different mechanisms for thermal regulation in the humid swamps of their homeworld. But if they could, Tavor would have been drenched. Instead, his head tendrils, those delicate finger-like appendages that crowned every Quar's skull, had gone completely still. On his homeworld, those tendrils served dual purposes, filtering harmful radiation from their sun to protect their soft green skin and detecting chemical signatures in the thick swamp air. Now, they hung limp and motionless, a clear sign of terror to anyone familiar with Quar physiology. The tendrils, usually in constant gentle motion like seaweed in a current, might as well have been screaming his fear to the universe. His pink eyes, evolved for the perpetual twilight of the swamp canopy, darted sideways. He tried to be discreet, stealing a glance at the reflection in the navigation console's glossy surface. The human must have noticed the movement, because their eyes met in the reflection. The human's lips pulled back, revealing those infamous white teeth in what Tavor immediately recognized as a threat display. He'd seen enough xenobiology documentaries to know that humans called it a smile. But the Galactic Central's educational broadcasts had been very clear. When a human showed its teeth, it could mean anything from friendship to imminent violence. Given the circumstances, Tavor wasn't betting on friendship. The Galactic Central broadcast! By the 7 moons, how could he have been so stupid? Just 3 days ago, the warning had come through on all channels. Advisory: human presence detected in areas 48 through 51. All vessels are advised to maintain extreme caution. Humans are classified as Category 9 apex predators. Avoid contact if possible. Report all sightings to local authorities immediately. Tavor had laughed, actually laughed when he'd heard it. Him and half the traders at the refueling station. Humans? In their backwater corner of the galaxy? The stories had to be exaggerated. No species could be that dangerous. They were probably just another batch of rowdy mammals that the core worlds were making a fuss about. The Galactic Central was always issuing warnings about something or other. Last year, it had been about contaminated hyperdrive coolant. The cycle before that, pirates near the rim. Traders like him couldn't afford to jump at every shadow if they wanted to make a living. Now, with that ancient kinetic weapon pressed against his seat and his head tendrils frozen in primal terror, Tavor could only engage in the most useless of activities, self-recrimination. He should have listened, should have taken the long route around Area 49, should have stayed in the core systems where the biggest danger was getting overcharged for docking fees, should have done anything except stop at that particular refueling station at that particular time when that particular human decided he needed a ride. The silence in the cockpit had stretched on for nearly 10 minutes now, broken only by the low noise of the ship's systems and his own carefully controlled breathing. Finally, Tavor managed to gather enough courage to speak. His voice came out higher than usual, his species equivalent of a nervous squeak.
Where? Where would you like me to take you?
He kept his eyes firmly fixed ahead, watching the stars streak by through the view screen.
You said to keep flying, but you haven't given me a destination.
The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, Tavor heard him shift in his seat, the polymer creaking under the human's weight. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an odd casual tone that somehow made everything worse. "Tell me about your species," the human said. "The Qua, right? And what exactly were you doing at that refueling station?" Tavor's tendrils moved from side to side in confusion. Why was the human asking about his species? Was this some kind of assessment? Trying to determine if he was worth keeping alive? He didn't dare lie. Humans were supposed to be excellent at detecting deception, something about micro-expressions and interspecies affinity, so he opted for the truth.
I'm a trader.
He began, his words coming slowly as he chose each one with care.
I was stopping to refuel before heading to a Cryonar auction about 100 light years from here. It's a major event. Happens only twice a year. I deal in specialty goods, rare minerals, artistic pieces from frontier worlds, that sort of thing.
He paused, his tendrils starting to move slightly as he found his voice.
I was just conducting normal business when you...
He caught himself, remembering the gun.
When you politely asked for a ride to... somewhere.
The human laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Tarvor's skin cells contract defensively. "Politely asked? That's generous of you, friend. I like you already." The casual familiarity in the human's voice was somehow more unsettling than the threats would have been. "And you're right. I might have overreacted a bit when I asked for that ride. See, I initially thought you might be connected to the owners of that refueling station. If that had been the case, well..." The human trailed off meaningfully. "Let's just say this would be a very different kind of ride." Tavor relaxed slightly, and he grew bold enough to activate his optical implant, overlaying his vision with the ship's internal sensor data. A small virtual window appeared in his peripheral vision, showing the feed from the cabin's rear-facing camera. He watched as the human lowered the weapon, letting it rest on his lap instead of pressing it against his seat. The ship's AI immediately began an in-depth analysis of the device, cross-referencing it against its database and giving more than just the name of the gun. The results made Tavor's primary heart skip a beat. S&W 500 Magnum, Earth origin, 50 caliber. Capable of... Dear Void, those kinetic energy readings couldn't be right. The thing could punch through light armor plating. He breathed out slowly, his tendrils relaxing fractionally.
"So,"
he ventured, emboldened by the lowered weapon,
"where exactly do you need to go?"
Through the virtual window, Tavor watched the humans settle back in their seat, adopting a casual posture that seemed at odds with the situation. The human was smaller than he'd expected from the stories, no more than 2 meters tall, with that distinctive bipedal frame and those eerily forward-facing predator eyes. The fur on their head was dark, cropped short in what must have been a practical style. They wore nondescript clothing that could have come from any of a dozen worlds, perfect for blending in. "It's complicated," the human said, waving one hand vaguely. "A series of unfortunate events, you might say. I need to retrieve a few things from a few places. Nothing too dramatic." They leaned forward slightly. "I'll make it worth your while, of course. How much were you expecting to make at this Cryonar auction?" Tavor's commercial instincts immediately warred with his survival instincts. On one hand, the human was actually offering to pay him, which was better than being robbed or spaced. On the other hand, quoting too high a figure might anger him, while going too low would be leaving money on the table, assuming he survived to spend it. Fear won out over greed.
10,000 credits,
he said honestly.
"That's if everything goes well. Auctions can be unpredictable, but I have good inventory this cycle."
The human laughed again, longer this time. 10,000 for a standard year worth of work. Friend, you're in the wrong business." They leaned back again, and Tavor could hear the smile in their voice. "Tell you what, give me 1 day, just 1 day of your time, and I'll pay you 20,000 credits. All you have to do is fly me to 4 locations, all within 100 light years of here. Simple transport job. 20,000 credits, double what he'd make at the auction, and in a fraction of the time. Tavor's tendrils began moving more animatedly as he processed this.
These 4 locations, he said carefully. What exactly will you be doing there?
Just picking up some things that belong to me, the human replied. 4 hyper jumps, 4 stops, maybe an hour or less at each location. You won't even have to leave your ship. Tavor weighed his options, accept the offer and potentially get drawn into whatever conflict the human was engaged in, or refuse and risk angering him. The weapon might be lowered, but it was still very much present. And even without it, the human was still a Category 9 apex predator. The stories said they could kill with their bare manipulators. Hands, he corrected himself. They called them hands. But 20,000 credits.
All right,
he said, finally, his voice steadier now that they were talking business.
We have a deal. 20,000 credits for 1 day's transport.
Excellent. The human's enthusiasm seemed genuine. Our first stop is another refueling station. Same owner as the last one, actually. The Xavier system. You know it? Tavor's tendrils drooped slightly. He knew the Xavier station. It had a reputation for being even rougher than the one they'd just left.
I know it. About 15 minutes by hyperdrive from here. May I ask what you'll be retrieving there?
Just a briefcase, the human said casually. Some idiot vizier thought he could steal from me and hide out there. Probably thinks he's safe because the station has good security. The human's voice hardened slightly. He thought wrong.
Will this be dangerous?
Tavor asked, already knowing the answer.
Should I be prepared for...
You just need to wait in the docking bay and be ready to leave quickly, the human interrupted. By the way, I should probably introduce myself. You can call me Agent Orion, and before you bother checking, that name won't appear in any databases you have access to. Agent. Of course he was an agent. Tavor's tendrils went still again.
And you expect me to fly you around for a day without knowing anything about what you're really doing?
Yes, Agent Orion replied simply, and something in their tone suggested the discussion was over. Tavor's head tentacles froze in place once more as he sighed, a long whistling sound through his breathing vents.
Fine. I'll take about 8 minutes to calculate the jump, then a few minutes in hyperspace to reach the Xavier system.
Sounds perfect, Orion said. Just remember, when we dock, you wait for me. Be ready to undock at a moment's notice. I shouldn't be more than an hour, but if something goes wrong... They trailed off meaningfully.
I'll be ready,
Tavor assured them, already entering the calculations into his navigation system. The ship's hyperdrive began its warm-up cycle, a low thrumming that Tavor felt in his bones. The stars outside began to take on a bluish tinge as the ship prepared to punch through the fabric of space-time. His fingers, thick and three-jointed, perfect for gripping in swamp mud, moved across the controls almost instinctively.
Jumping in 10 seconds,
he announced, following standard protocol even though he only had one passenger. The jump to hyperspace was always disorienting for Quar. Their tendrils, so finely attuned to chemical and energy signatures, went haywire in the strange non-space of FTL travel. Tavor closed his primary eyes and relied on his secondary optical implants, which could filter out the worst of the sensory chaos. Minutes crawled by in silence. Agent Orion seemed content to wait quietly, but Tavor could feel their presence like a weight on his consciousness. Every few seconds, he caught himself checking the virtual window, watching the human who sat still as a statue enjoying the nauseating sight, the massive revolver still resting on their lap. The ship's computer chimed softly. Approaching Xavier system. Deceleration in 30 seconds. Tavor opened his primary eyes and began the emergence sequence. The stars exploded back into proper points of light as they dropped out of hyperspace. There, hanging against the black, was the Xavier refueling station, a sprawling structure of mismatched modules and additions, like a mechanical tumor growing in space.
Xavier Station Control. This is trading vessel Swamp Runner requesting docking permission.
Tavor transmitted, using his ship's official registration.
Swamp Runner, you are cleared for Bay 11. Be advised, we're running a special on coolant today. 15% off for quantities over 50 liters. Acknowledged, Control.
Tavor guided his ship toward the indicated docking bay, his movements automatic after years of space travel. The station grew larger in the view screen, revealing details that made him nervous. Scorch marks on some of the hull plating, a defense turret that tracked their approach just a little too aggressively. This was definitely a rough station. The docking was smooth, magnetic clamps engaging with a satisfying thunk. Tavor began his post-flight checks, trying to look busy and not think about what Agent Orion was about to do. "Right," the human said, standing and stretching. Tavor was surprised again by how fluid their movements were, like a predator unfurling. "I'll be back within an hour. Keep the engines warm. If I'm not back in 90 minutes, leave without me and consider our deal void."
And if I leave the moment you step off the ship?
Tavor asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Orion paused at the airlock door and looked back. Through the virtual window, Tavor could see them smile, that same teeth-baring expression that could mean anything. "Then nothing happens to you, but you don't get paid. Your choice, friend. 20,000 credits for 1 day's work, or fly away now and go back to your 10,000 credit auctions." The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Agent Orion stepped through without another word, leaving Tavor alone with his thoughts and the ticking chronometer on his console. He sat there for exactly 43 seconds after the airlock sealed, his hands poised over the controls. The undocking sequence would take less than a minute. He could be in hyperspace in 3, back to his normal life, his normal trade routes, his normal profits. His hand moved toward the control and stopped. 20,000 credits.
What in the 7 hells am I doing?
He muttered to himself, pulling his hands back. His tendrils writhed in agitation, a visible manifestation of his internal conflict. He didn't understand it himself. Every instinct, every shred of common sense told him to run. But something, call it greed, call it curiosity, call it temporary insanity, kept him in that docking bay. The chronometer ticked on. 1 minute. 2. 5. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. 10 minutes. 15. 20. Tavor's ship AI began cataloging anomalies from the station's sensor readings, irregular vibrations propagating through the superstructure, sudden pressure drops in several modules, electromagnetic spikes consistent with explosive decompression. The probability calculations scrolling across his virtual display made his secondary heart skip. 87% likelihood of internal explosions, 94% probability of combat-related structural damage.
By the Ancient Ones!
Tavor whispered, his tendrils curling defensively against his skull. Whatever Agent Orion was doing in there, it wasn't subtle. 30 minutes passed. 40. 50. The station's automated systems had begun broadcasting emergency protocols, though no general evacuation had been called. Tavor watched through his ship's external cameras as repair drones swarmed toward one of the upper modules, their welding torches creating pinpricks of light against the station's hull. 70 minutes. 80. The chronometer's display seemed to mock him, each second ticking away potential credits. 20,000 credits, vanishing 1 moment at a time. His hand hovered over the undocking controls again. The human had been clear. 90 minutes, then leave. No payment if he left early, but also no payment if the human didn't make it back. 85 minutes. Tarvor began the pre-flight sequence, his movements mechanical and resigned. The smart money was on leaving now. Take the loss, learn the lesson. Never pick up mysterious humans with ancient kinetic weapons again. 87 minutes. The docking clamps disengaged at once. Tarvor's fingers moved toward the thruster controls. Movement. Outside the ship, a figure emerged from the docking tube, moving with that distinctive human gait. But something was different. The clothes. Agent Orion was wearing an entirely different outfit, some kind of maintenance coverall that didn't quite fit his frame, and he was carrying a massive briefcase that looked like it weighed half as much as he did, though the human hefted it with disturbing ease. Tarvor quickly re-engaged the docking clamps, his tendrils practically vibrating with a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. The airlock cycled, and Agent Orion stepped aboard, the deck plates groaning slightly under the weight of whatever was in that case. "Good, you waited," the human said, settling into the same seat as before and placing the suitcase carefully beside him. "Now get us out of here. Right now. I may have made a few enemies during my visit." Tarvor's hands flew over the controls, abandoning every safety protocol he'd learned in 20 years of flying. The docking clamps released again, and he fired the maneuvering thrusters at full power, practically tearing his ship away from the station. Warning lights flashed as the station's traffic control system protested the unauthorized departure, but Tarvor ignored them all.
"Hyperdrive warming up,"
he announced, his voice tight.
"Where to?"
Behind him, he heard fabric rustling. Through his virtual window, he watched Agent Orion peel off the ill-fitting coverall, revealing his original clothing underneath, now decorated with splashes of green blood. Vizier blood, if Tarvor's xenobiology knowledge was correct. The human, as if knowing he was staring through the camera feed, shrugged. "Don't worry about it. Humans have red blood. This isn't mine." Tarvor went rigid at the casual mention of violence, his tendrils freezing mid-motion. He managed to force out the question,
"Our next stop?"
"System G157, Orion replied, checking something on a small device he'd pulled from his pocket. "It's an asteroid field, about 20 light-years from here." Surprise momentarily overrode fear, and Tarvor's implant automatically queried his navigation database. The search returned null results. No settlements, no mining operations, no navigation hazards, nothing. According to official records, G157 was just another empty system among millions.
"There's nothing in G157,
he said carefully as the hyperdrive finished its warm-up sequence.
"At least, nothing in my charts."
"That's because it's not supposed to exist," Orion said with what sounded like amusement. "Ever heard of Deathworlder taverns? No? Well, you're about to get an education. There's a hollowed-out asteroid there, maybe 3 kilometers across. Artificial atmosphere inside. Transparent force field for walls. Gives you a direct view of space while you drink. Very atmospheric." The human leaned back in his seat. "Don't worry. I'm just going there for information. Quick in and out. No violence necessary. Probably." Tarvor found himself making a sound that might have been laughter if it weren't so strained. No violence in a hidden tavern full of Deathworlders in an uncharted system. Of course. Why not? He was already in this deep. Might as well see it through to the end. The 20,000 credits better be worth it, if he survived to spend them.
"Jumping to hyperspace,"
he announced, and reality twisted around them once more. The journey to G157 took 30 minutes, during which Orion cleaned his weapon and checked the contents of his mysterious suitcase, without ever fully opening it. Tarvor tried not to think about what might be inside that could require such a reinforced container. They emerged from hyperspace into what appeared to be empty space, just as the charts had indicated. But Orion leaned forward, pointing at what looked like a particularly dense cluster of asteroids. "There. Third rock from the left, the one that's rotating backwards. Tarvor adjusted course, his sensors gradually resolving details as they approached. What had looked like a normal asteroid from a distance revealed itself to be anything but. The surface was too smooth, too regular, and there, a docking port, cleverly disguised but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. As they drew closer, Tarvor's breath caught in his throat. Through the transparent force field that formed one entire side of the hollowed asteroid, he could see inside. The sight made his tendrils contract involuntarily. Deathworlders, dozens of them. Varsars with their natural armor and 4 arms. Kelgans, whose home planet had 3 times standard gravity. A pair of Thraxians with their cybernetic enhancements glinting in the artificial light. And others, species Tarvor had only seen in xenobiology warnings. They were fighting, they were drinking, they were conducting business deals over tables made from salvaged starship hulls. Some were doing things that Tarvor's mind shied away from cataloging, activities that would have been considered private by most civilized species, but were apparently just another Thursday night here. His pink eyes widened as he spotted a pair of Vorthan in what was clearly a mating display, visible to any passing ship through the transparent wall. "Welcome to the Void's Edge," Orion said dryly. "Last honest establishment in this corner of the galaxy." The docking was smooth despite Tarvor's trembling hands. Through the docking tube's transparent walls, he had a perfect view of the tavern's entrance. The airlock looked like it had been salvaged from a military vessel, all heavy armor and warning signs in a dozen languages. Orion stood, leaving the massive suitcase behind, but checking his weapon one more time. Before stepping out, he turned back to Tarvor, and his expression had lost all traces of humor. "Listen carefully. The option to leave? That was back at Zavir Station. You're in this now, all the way to the end. If this ship isn't here when I get back, I will find you, and unlike our first meeting, I won't be polite about it. Clear?" Tarvor could only nod his head, his tendrils hanging limp with resignation. "Good." Orion left the briefcase behind and crossed the docking tube with an easy, loping gait that spoke of long familiarity with zero gravity. Tarvor watched through the transparent walls as the human reached the tavern's entrance and stepped inside. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Drinks paused halfway to mouths. Every predator in that room turned to assess the newcomer, and the tension was obvious even from Tarvor's position in the ship. A trio of Varsars, each one easily 2.5 meters tall and armed with military-grade pulse weapons, approached Orion. Tarvor couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read body language well enough. The Varsars were aggressive, crowding the human. Orion stood relaxed, hands at his sides, apparently unconcerned. Then, one of the Varsars made the mistake of actually drawing their weapon. What happened next occurred so fast that Tarvor's visual processing struggled to keep up. Orion's leg snapped up, catching the first Varsar in what must have been a joint, sending the alien stumbling. In the same fluid motion, the human's hand went to his weapon. The ancient revolver roared 3 times in quick succession, the muzzle flashes visible even from the docking port. The Varsar's military-grade armor might have been proof against energy weapons, but the S&W 500 Magnum punched through it like paper. All 3 aliens crumpled, their yellow blood pooling on the tavern floor. The tavern erupted into chaos. Tables flipped as patrons dove for cover. Some ran for exits, others drew weapons, and a few seemed to be taking bets on the outcome. Through it all, Orion moved with crystal-clear purpose, not toward the exit, but deeper into the establishment. He grabbed a small alien, some species Tarvor didn't recognize, barely a meter tall with mottled gray skin, and slammed them against the wall. The revolver pressed against the alien's oversized head, and even from this distance, Tarvor could see the creature's mouth moving rapidly, spilling what must have been every secret it had ever known. Minutes passed. The other patrons had settled into an uneasy standoff, weapons drawn but not firing, waiting to see how this would play out. Finally, Orion released the small alien, who immediately scurried away into the crowd. The human backed toward the exit, weapon still drawn but pointed at the ceiling in what might have been a Deathworlder sign of temporary truce. He was back in the ship within minutes, settling into his seat as if he'd just returned from buying groceries. "Second moon of Krasar," he said without preamble. "How long?" Tavor didn't ask questions this time. He just started the hyperdrive calculations, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still flooding his system. The reputation of humans wasn't exaggerated. If anything, it was understated. He found himself profoundly grateful that he'd chosen to wait at that first stop. The journey to Krasar was mercifully short, just 15 minutes in hyperspace. They emerged in the shadow of a gas giant, its second moon a blue-green marble orbiting serenely. The landing was uneventful, Tarvor settling down at a public spaceport on the outskirts of what looked like a major city. "This is a quick retrieval," Orion said, checking his weapon again. "Keep the engines hot. Don't even power down the defensive screens. This might get messy." Tarvor nodded, already running through his emergency departure checks.
"I'll be ready."
The human disappeared into the city, taking the enormous briefcase with him this time, and Tarvor found himself offering a brief prayer for whatever poor souls had kidnapped someone this human was tracking. They had no idea what was coming for them. This time he didn't have long to wait. Barely 10 minutes had passed when movement caught his eye. Orion was sprinting across the landing pad, and he wasn't alone. In his arms was a figure wrapped in what looked like a thermal blanket, clutched against his chest as he ran. The briefcase was nowhere to be seen. "Go! Go! Go!" Orion shouted as he dove through the airlock. Tarvor had already begun the launch sequence, not even looking behind to check what sort of creature this human had rescued. The ship lurched upward just as the first laser blast scorched the landing pad where they'd been sitting. His defensive screens flared as more shots followed them up, and warning alarms screamed about target locks from what seemed like every defensive platform on the moon.
"They're mobilizing everything!"
Tarvor shouted, pushing his small trader vessel far beyond its design specifications as they ascended toward the clouds. The hull groaned under the acceleration.
"This ship isn't rated for combat! We're not going to make it!"
More ships appeared on his scope, military interceptors launching from hidden bases, closing fast. Tarvor had no weapons, minimal shields, and a cargo hold full of trade goods instead of military-grade armor. They were dead. But Orion was smiling. 5, the human said calmly.
"What?"
Tarvor spared a fraction of his attention from desperate evasive maneuvers. 4. A missile lock alarm screamed. Tarvor threw the ship into a spiral that made his stomach lurch. 3. The interceptors were almost in weapon range. Once they opened fire with their main guns, it would be over. 2.
"What are you?"
1. The buildings they'd just left vanished in a ball of fire. The shockwave caught them even at this altitude, sending the ship tumbling. But Tarvor's instruments showed the immediate result. The interceptors were either vaporized by the blast or peeling away, their pilots apparently giving up.
"They fled?"
Tarvor managed to gasp out as he fought to stabilize their trajectory. "Mercenaries," Orion explained with a shrug. "Their employers just got vaporized. No pay, no play. Basic economics." Tarvor's tendrils went completely still as the logic sank in. It was sound reasoning. It was also utterly, completely ruthless. An entire city district gone, just to cover their escape. As they reached the safety of open space, and Tarvor could finally breathe again, his attention turned to the figure Orion had rescued. The thermal blanket had slipped during their violent escape, revealing green skin and delicate features that made his heart skip a beat. He knew that face. Everyone in 1,000 light-years knew that face. Princess Hiberia of Lahar, whose kidnapping 3 weeks ago had dominated the news broadcasts. The heir to one of the wealthiest systems in the galaxy, taken by pirates demanding an impossible ransom. And now she was on his ship, clinging to Agent Orion's arm as her whole body shook with reaction.
I suppose,
Tarvor said slowly, his voice carefully neutral.
our last stop is Lahar.
Orion laughed, genuine, delighted laughter that seemed wildly inappropriate given they'd just escaped a nuclear explosion. Too smart for your own good, Tarvor. Here's some free advice. Pretend you don't recognize her. Makes life easier for everyone. He grinned, showing those unsettling human teeth. But don't worry about it. Just a suggestion for the future. The journey to Lahar was quiet. Princess Hibari never spoke, just clung to Orion with the desperation of someone who'd seen too much. Tarvor flew in silence, processing everything that had happened in the last day. The reception at Lahar's primary spaceport was exactly what he'd expected. Royal guards in full armor, medical teams, and enough firepower to level a small moon. They whisked the princess away within moments of landing, though she looked back once at Orion with an expression Tarvor couldn't read. Orion lingered as the chaos swirled around them, then produced a credit chip from somewhere and tossed it to Tarvor. 60,000 credits, he said casually. 20 for the ride, as agreed. 40 for your discretion about certain passengers and events. Tarvor clutched the chip, his commercial instincts warring with sheer amazement.
You really are the deadliest organism ever discovered.
Orion shook his head, that human smile playing at his lips again. Nah, I'm just a mortal, same as you. There are things out there that make me look like a hatchling. Ancient species that were old when the galaxy was young. I'm just good at my job. He gave a casual wave and walked down the ramp, disappearing into the crowd of royal security like smoke. Tarvor sat in his captain's chair for a long time after that, staring at the credit chip. 60,000 credits for one day's work. Enough to buy better cargo, upgrade his ship, maybe even purchase a permanent berth at a respectable station. He didn't believe Orion's denial for a second. He'd seen what humans could do now, had witnessed the casual violence and calculated ruthlessness of Earth's children. The warnings were all true, every one of them. But as he finally powered up his ship and set course for home, Tarvor found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, having a human owe you a favor wasn't the worst position to be in. He'd encountered the deadliest organism ever discovered and lived to tell the tale, though he was fairly certain he'd never actually tell it to anyone. 40,000 credits bought a lot of silence, after all. The stars streaked past as he jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind nuclear fire and rescued princesses and taverns full of monsters. Just another day in the life of a trader. A trader who now knew exactly why humans were considered the deadliest creatures ever discovered.